So, all good, everyone? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Welcome, everyone, to today's virtual industry visit. We will begin our event today with Kitab Al-Fatiha. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of INSEF and the Student Representative Council Term 2020-2021, we welcome you to the virtual industry visit. We are proud to bring you this priceless opportunity conducted in a revolutionary way, proving that in our commitment in developing a learning experience that is both enriching and industry savvy. We hope that today's industry visit becomes a strong catalyst in developing strong personal ties between INSEF, its communities, its students, and the industry as a whole. Without further ado, we will start our virtual industry visit today by inviting Professor Dr. Mansoor Ibrahim, the Deputy President, Academic and Dean of School of Graduate Studies, to give his welcoming remarks. Without further ado, Professor, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa man tabi'u bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I cannot see everyone, but I have the names here. Whether they are here or not, Sheikh Musa Al-Khari, Head of Internal Sharia Audit, DIB, and Brother Anas Jafar, Head of Islamic Window of Emirates NDB. And I saw my dear former students there, Dr. Saad Bakri, right? So Alhamdulillah, for a long time, have not been able to see you. I think the last time that we met was in 2018, if I was not mistaken. And all others from the banks, as well as all INSEF students. Again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now, first and foremost, let us thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Almighty for make it possible for us to gather together here on the part of student INSEF to be able to learn from the international banks, both Dubai Islamic banks as well as Emirates NDB. And for the banks from the UAE to contribute, inshallah, to the learning process of the future generations for the promotions of Islamic finance industry. Right? And for the information of our friends from Dubai and UAE, Dubai, UAE, right? Industrial linkages is basically part and parcels of our learning process, or part of our curriculums. Right? We have many different areas that we involve the industries so that they can play a major role in shaping the future human capitals. We have industry visits, right? And normally we have physical industry visits, right? But then, alhamdulillah, blessing in disguise from the COVID, we are not able to do physical visit, but then we are able to do virtual visits, and most importantly, internationally. And now is the first time I would say that our students here will be exposed to the international Islamic banking experience, right? And the second one, we also have the professor of practices that comes and lecture in the class, right? And we have action-based learning that our students serve as a consultants to solve the problems that are faced or currently faced by the industry. And who knows, in the future, for example, we may want to partner, and in fact, we would like to partner with international banks like Dubai Islamic Bank or NBD to be a place that we can send a group of our students to be a consultant. And of course, there's no financing involved in terms of taking our students to be part of mini consultants. The whole idea is to get our students exposed to the reality on the ground, right, for our master program. So on behalf of INSEF, really appreciate your willingness from both of the banks to be our host today, and hopefully our students can learn and can bring that knowledge, right, and then come back and discuss, elaborate, expand, and with the hope that in the future we can bring a new, we can push Islamic finance to the new frontier. Thanks a lot, and hopefully all students can take note of the practical experience from both international banks, right? And hope that you will benefit from this virtual industry visits. Again, thank you on behalf of INSEF. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Professor Dr. Mansur Ibrahim, for that wonderful welcoming remarks. We will continue today's session with a briefing by our very own MIF and PhD INSEF alumni, Dr. Saad Bakali, Manager at the Higher Sharia Authority Banking Supervision, Central Bank of the UAE. Dr. Saad, the floor is yours, so you can begin the session briefing.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Thank you, Brother Juan, for this introduction. Although I'm not that old, you know, so, but it's okay. Actually, yeah, I'm old alumni of, proud alumni of UAE, of INSEF, to be honest. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone in this virtual visit to the UAE and to its remarkable Islamic finance markets. I'm glad to be here and to deliver these remarks to all of my brothers and sisters at INSEF. By way of introducing myself, my name is Saad and I'm from Morocco and a proud alumni of INSEF. I did my master's, PhDs, and PhD at INSEF.
Dr. Saad, I think we lost you there. Your screen is frozen. It's okay, everyone. We'll give it a few seconds. Maybe there's a network issue on Dr. Saad's end. Hello, Dr. Saad. Yes, now very loud and clear. You were saying how proud you were as INSEF alumni?
Yes, always. Yeah, I'm also, as I said, I'm the proud alumni of INSEF, as I did my master's and PhDs in INSEF, and also serve as a research assistant both INSEF and ISRA. INSEF means a lot more than a place of study. It's much more than that, and you know, Prof. Mansur Ibrahim, we are very, very pleased to see today, along with all our brothers and sisters in Assad, who knows very well why is that. I came to INSEF with just a little bit of knowledge of in finance, accounting, economics, and econometrics, which still, you know, comes to me at nights in my bad dreams. You know, econometrics, it's a bit of hassle. May Allah help you all. But I found INSEF is the right place to build the right knowledge and expertise. We felt like back then like a family, and I think we live what's so-called the true spirits of risk sharing, you know, in terms of studying. And we felt that from all aspects or from all departments in INSEF, which they really host us and you know, treat us like family back then. As you know, Islamic finance is a multi-dimensional field, and we are studied that are specialized students in INSEF back then. You know, we are specialized in each and every aspect of this field. And everyone was willing to help and give unconditionally whatever he possesses in knowledge and expertise. Doing that, we felt helpful and inspired that Islamic finance industry will be living the spirit of risk sharing once more. Dear brothers and sisters, Islamic finance needs leaders like you to acquire the necessary knowledge and expertise and get out there and lead the industry to its potential that's yet tapped. In the modern Islamic finance come with a promise that is prosperity, resilience, poverty alleviation, and more. We are yet to fulfill these promises, but I'm confident that with the joint efforts by all of us, that will lead to the states of that promise being fulfilled. INSAFE is the right place to start working for that, as you are surrounded with all and everything that enable you to do just that. It has been 45 years since the state of modern Islamic banking with the first commercial bank incorporated in the UAE, that's Dubai Islamic Bank. So it's been a long time and enough time for us to learn from this journey of Islamic banking. There are other institutions also that's been started maybe a bit earlier and some other initiatives as well. Today, we have Islamic finance presence in a way or form almost in every part of the globe. But Islamic finance is accused for being merely mimicking the conventional finance with just a little bit of difference. This means that Islamic finance is going to fall into the same problems as conventional, and then it's only like a window dressing kind of finance. It's not truly Islamic. That's what is being claimed by many in the markets. This claim may not be totally true, as the Sharia compliance approach followed by the industry inherits some of the features of risk sharing being the essence of Islamic finance. However, we need to do more in unleashing the potential of Islamic finance by innovating risk sharing based instruments and markets and introducing enabling regulatory and regulation and legislations. One of the keys to do so for me is to try simplify the concepts of Islamic finance through risk sharing. The complexity around Islamic finance transaction makes it very hard for market players to understand, comprehend, and absorb the concepts. Risk sharing is a simplified Sharia-based concept that will help in this regard. In addition, the close connection with the markets is a key. That's why INSAFE keeps this linkage since my time. I'm still doing it very actively with the markets, and that is very important and help us understand the perspective of the market players and the challenges that they are facing. That's not for us to accept it as a whole, but to challenge it with the right arguments and solution, especially in the age of digitalization and financial technology. This is why this close connection and this today session is very, very important. So we will have, inshallah, today a close interaction with some of the markets, UAE market leaders in Islamic finance in the UAE from both banks, Dubai Islamic Bank and Emirates NDB. Before I release you to them and they may start their presentation, I just wanted to introduce some of the key aspects, not very long, but just key aspects. Maybe my colleagues will be diving much more deeper into these aspects of Islamic banking and finance in the UAE. Islamic banking in the UAE represents 25% of the total banking assets, with full-fledged Islamic banks, 8 full-fledged Islamic banks, and more than 15 Islamic windows. UAE is one of the leading markets in sukuk origination and structuring. It's also a hub of innovation and creativity when it comes to Sharia compliance products and services. And we may be introduced to some of these aspects today. UAE in 2018 introduced a new legislation for Islamic, for the central bank, which also had some aspects of Islamic banking in it. In 2018, UAE witnessed the creation of the higher Sharia authority, equivalent to what is in Malaysia called SAC, or Sharia Advisory Council. It's responsible for all the Sharia compliance aspects of Islamic banking in the UAE. It introduced a number of standards, regulations, including Sharia compliance aspects of it and Sharia governance as well. We may go with our presentation today, and we will be, inshallah, there to answer your questions, if any, and help you maybe understand the UAE market more. We have, my colleagues here, they are very knowledgeable, and they've been in these markets for long number of years, and they will be, inshallah, the right people to get you introduced to these markets in the right way. We have brothers from Dubai Islamic banks and from Emirates NDB, and also we have some brothers coming from a subsidiary of Islamic banks, which is Dar Sharia, which also are leading in innovating products and services for the UAE markets. With that, I will release you from this, from me, and back to Brother Wan, and just want to express my thanks for giving me this opportunity, and I'm glad to speak to my brothers and sisters from INSAF once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saad, for your wonderful remarks and speech. We will proceed, ladies and gentlemen, with our virtual industry visit, with a presentation and virtual tour by Dubai Islamic Bank. This session will be represented by Mr. Musa Khouri, Mr. Ahmed Haikal, and Mr. Muhammad Saifullah Khan. They are all representatives from Dubai Islamic Bank to share us with their inner mechanics and operations of their bank. Without further ado, the floor is yours, gentlemen, from Dubai Islamic Bank.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
It's our honor and privilege to be amongst you today. I've heard a lot of things about INSAF, and we have a handful of them in our circle, Dr. Saad being amongst the top promoters of INSAF. And I mean, the intellectual and ethical and spiritual selves of the INSAF graduates speak a lot, so I don't think they need a lot of promotion as well. They promote themselves by themselves. Without further ado, I would like also to welcome my brothers, Brother Ahmed Haikal and Brother Saifullah Khan, Muhammad Saifullah Khan. Brother Muhammad Saifullah Khan is the CEO of Dar al-Sharia, and Brother Ahmed Haikal is also part of his senior team. I'm from my end representing Dubai Islamic Bank as head of internal Sharia audit, and my two other colleagues will be representing Dar al-Sharia. My presentation will be a bit different than the normal presentations you have seen in the market. I will not tell you how the Islamic Bank works. I will not tell you what is Murabah, Mudaraba, or Istisna'. I will also not speak about any of the sukuk or syndications. Mine will be quite different. I will leave it to the presentation to speak itself. So if you allow me, I'll share the screen now to start my presentation. I hope you can see it. This is a tour in the Sharia department. The Sharia department is actually, before we got the segregation of Sharia audit from Sharia review, I was heading the Sharia department, which was doing both the ends of the process, the audit part and the review part to some extent. I'd like to take you on a tour on how we run the department, and we still run it in this way, but I want to show you some of the initiatives and internal, maybe secrets we had. Okay, so I'll just quickly share with you the strategy we had, or the basic components of it. What you can see here is by way of images, our strategy being a Sharia compliant driver, raising awareness, developing our human capital, and managing our quality, which is in line with DIB's strategy of having prolonged growth and being the most progressive Islamic bank in the world. We believe in alignment, and awareness, human development align well with growth, and being the most progressive aligns well with quality management as well. And the I in Dubai Islamic Bank is Islamic, so we need to drive Sharia compliance in that sense. This is how the bottom line, the bottom images, align with the top ones. The bottom ones is the strategy of our department, while the top one is the strategy of the bank. I'll take you very quickly through the presentation. It usually takes 1.5 days. No, I'm just joking. It usually takes 1 hour. I'll just take 15 minutes, inshallah. This is the implementation of our department strategy. We believe that performance of people, depends on 2 things, or performance of a department depends on 2 things. Number 1, people should be engaged. If people are not engaged, there's no use to try to bring the technology. It's like having a Rolls Royce, but the guy who's driving it has no license, or maybe he has no even motivation to drive it, so it will stay parked forever. Same on the other hand, we need a lot of technological advancement in order to be able to reach to higher heights. So people from one end need to be developed with the right skills and engaged and motivated, while technology should also aid them so they will not reach to a bottleneck of technology. So by technology and by people development and engagement, we are able to eliminate any bottlenecks and eliminate any people disengagement or people lack of skills, so that we will not reach to any bottleneck where either technology or people are hindering us back. So how did we go about this? When it comes to people engagement, one of the first things I've started is I gave every staff in my department a full day of my calendar, and I told him, prepare for this day because it will be a one-off day in your career life in this department, which will create a lot of difference in how you go about being here in the department. So I asked every person to express to me where he wants to reach in life in terms of career, in terms of, let's say, personal, health, wealth, projects, spiritual, whatever area that he feels or she feels that is an area that requires, for him to live a life that he wishes to live and is important to him. So I asked him to resemble to me this life. And then I went back and I broke this down into values that this guy holds high regard for. And then I synergized between the strategy of the department and the bank and the life purpose of that guy. And I put together many projects and schemes for every person, customized for him, that will allow him to reach to his life purpose while also achieving the bank's and the department strategy. This was one of the things that we have done. I wrote a story about it actually and spoke at TEDx about some of it. Sharia reward points was another motivator tool that I used. It was the currency of the department. And for every idea, there was a formula that we have built in the department that we gave every idea a number of points, Sharia reward points, SRPs. And also we used SRPs to reward people who did the extra mile and who did the things that are out of their KPI scope. We also gamified all the main functions of the department. So every person could actually play a game, and through playing that game, he will achieve some of his KPIs. So I can give you an example. Burj Khalifa and the next nearby towers had a puzzle of 2,000 pieces. And we gave this 2,000 piece puzzle to a team of 10. And every team member has around 10 KPIs. So this is 100 KPIs, 10 by 10, 10 staff by 10 KPIs. And we told every staff member, you cannot put any of the magnetic puzzle on the wall until and unless you perform one of the KPIs, then you have 20 pieces to put, and so on. So I don't need to follow up with the team. I just need to check where Burj Khalifa is, which floor. Then I know where the team is, where they have reached in constructing Burj Khalifa and achieving their targets. Having said that, let me go now to people development and upskilling people. We created a program called Everyone is a Hypo. Hypo is It's not hippo, by the way, huh? It's not like hippopotamus. This is high potential. Just a disclaimer. Hypo is a term we used in Dubai Islamic Bank for the succession planning pool, where we develop people to go to the next. So they are the second in command, let's say, or third in command, who will take lead in the future. So I told my department, we will not select any person to become a hypo or not. We will call everyone a hypo. And we created our own Sharia Development Center. And based on that, we took them in a journey of doing psychometric tests, doing behavioral assessments, putting together a yearly plan for developing themselves, tapping into behavioral and technical areas, and having a coach. Everyone in the department, by the way, has a coach, and we have an internal coaching framework as well, where everyone, including myself, have a coach from within the department. We had every Tuesday from 8:30 to 9 a TED Talk roundtable, where we play a TED Talk for 18 minutes or less, and then we talk in the next 12 minutes or more about how can we apply this TED Talk in our department and how can we apply it in our lives. And this was a very, with the COVID, we discontinued for a bit, but we are planning to come back shortly, inshallah. The quarterly business visits are business visits that we have done to many of the multinationals, such as Google, such as Oracle. We have also visited our digital center at Salat, and our local telecommunication company. We visited the Dubai Islamic Economy Development Center. Our quarterly business visits were designed just like your industry visit today, to seek the best practices from the other industries, not our own industry, and apply it in ours. One of the definitions of innovation is to borrow the best practices of other industries and make them relevant in yours. So this is what we did in our business visits. The Sharia Departments Forum, I think now you have heard about it. We have evolved it to become an organization. We called it the Sharia Professionals Association, SPA for short, not so it's 5-star SPA, but Sharia compliant SPA, inshallah. The Sharia Department Forum is a forum where all the UAE nationals, the UAE based banks, so let's say whether they are the international banks or the local banks, the Sharia departments within, be it audit or control, come under one roof and discuss best practices, share knowledge and experience, and put together a list of criteria, a list of standards to follow in their own, in the Sharia departments, daily procedures, policies, and technical and administrative matters. So it is to upscale the practices of the Sharia departments rather than the Islamic finance in whole. I'm not sure how I am in time. If please shout out if I'm crossing. We don't need to go through the whole presentation. I just wanted to give you a gist and feel of how we're running the place. If you feel I'm running above my time, please just stop me. Don't be embarrassed to stop me.
Inshallah, Mr. Musa should be okay, because the next session is scheduled for 4:15 p.m. And the speakers before you were very brief, so you have all the time you need.
No, inshallah, I'll leave time for my colleagues.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much. The next project we worked on is we linked all HR best practices to Sharia, so which means that we collated all the best practices from the international human resources around the world, be it recruitment, in the recruitment field, be it in the talent management, learning and development, be it in the performance and reward. So all the best practices of human resources and managing people around, as per the best practices of HR internationally, we have put them on a table and linked them to Sharia. By the way, Dr. Saad was the champion of this project, just to bring things into context. So he initiated this, and then his other colleagues continued after he left. Having said that, this area, linking Sharia to HR is not restricted to HR. Sharia is a very universal way of life, and that's why linking Sharia to different industries is key for us to live the holistic way of living up to Sharia standards. Sharia standards not only for finance. Sharia standards should be for each and every aspect of our lives, and all industries can benefit from what Sharia brought to humanity. In technological advancement, what we have done, we have put together a system where we can check on the KPIs of all the team in every 20 seconds, which means that I can have live KPIs. I called it the Olympic sheet because it shows every person where he is from the team on live basis, and it shows who's the first and who's the last every second, which means that there's no room for people being surprised by the end of the year why they were ranked so and so. This is live, this is public information, and everyone knows how he was assessed or how he is assessed live, and everyone can put his put all his efforts to let's say top the team and to go to the highest ranks as and when the game is going and the race is live. Artificial intelligence was introduced in the department. I remember visiting Tokyo, Japan. The AI convention there is the biggest in Japan. I visited around 15 suppliers and vendors and AI, let's say, industry players. And from that, I then saw other countries such as the US, Europe, and other areas where AI was also very famous and advanced. And from that, we were able to put together 3 projects. The first one was Audit with a Click. Audit with a Click is a platform that we're still working on that from one end connects to the auditors, Sharia auditors criteria, and each criteria point which documents are linked to it. So there is a full system on that end, and there is another system that is connected to the platform, which is the core banking system. So what does this platform do? It links the auditor's criteria to the core banking system in a manner that you only need to type in the department that you are auditing, the dates that you have, the product you want to audit, and then you just click. And when you click, the platform by itself connects the live transactions here and whatever outstanding the transactions are there with the criteria of the auditors. And then based on that, the initial audit report is generated. However, it doesn't stop there because the auditor will need to do a deep dive to check the observations that the system cannot find. So the auditor will then have to do this deep dive and bring the gems from underneath the water. And the job of the auditor in doing this is only once, because he will then need to teach the system to do this deep dive. And then the auditor will need to do a deeper dive, and the cycle continues. So auditor is only allowed to get only one time the new observation, and any further observations that are repeated based on this new observation will only be allowed to be get by the system. So which means that we are giving the auditor the time to spend on the things that matter rather than the things that the system can do. The robot Sharia trainer is another exciting thing that we were working on. Maybe budgets are not helping us now. The robot Sharia trainer is basically a trainer that can go and attend the orientation session for the newcomers and give them a full 2-day course while answering questions as well and saying jokes in between, and can also be deputed in the branches to answer some of the general public's questions. With time, maybe it can also maybe do the body language and use the body language of real human beings. We also were in the process of developing the Smart Mufti. The Smart Mufti is a platform where all the fatwa of Dubai Islamic Bank are placed in a very organized and segregated manner that can be read by the system. And once the query is received, whether orally or in writing, it is linked between this treasure of fatwas and the query that is received. And then we train the system until it gets the linkage correctly each and every time. And once the answer comes out, it's at a very high confidence level, as they say in the tech language, above 95%. Here we have given ourselves 24 hours to verify whether the fatwa was correct or not. If there is no response, then it is correct. Otherwise, we have to respond in 24 hours. The project is not live yet. We have worked on it for some time. It's currently on hold, but we hope that it will regain life, inshallah. We also worked on the sustainability. We have a Sharia dictionary, a very unique one. You know, what we learned in childhood, A is for apple, B is for banana, and C is for carrot, is no longer applicable here in the department. So A, for example, is A for alignment of life purpose to corporate strategy, B is for brainstorming, C is for coaching, D is for digitization, and so on. And I told my people, I will, after, I mean, every Salatul Dhuhr, let's say in Wednesday, I will ask you what is E, what is J, what is Z, what is Y, just to ensure that the dictionary is memorized, so that the culture can and the mindset can change as well amongst you. So the dictionary was designed in a manner that it summarizes all the initiatives and the ways we work in the department, so that our team, while memorizing, can also instill the mindset and the culture of the department. And whenever a person visits my office, I have around 6 canvases. They are around me now, but maybe I will not trouble you with tweaking the laptop. And I show them from A to Z as an introduction to the canvases, showing each and every aspect of our department. The Sharia Leadership Development Program is a program whereby I invited the junior staff to step into a leadership development program, which I developed, I mean, from within, in-house. It's not the one that the bank runs. It was the 2 unique things in this program is that it was customized. The person will design his own program, and it was very practical. So there were no, there wasn't many readings and videos and courses. It was more about putting together something that suits every person and his needs, and having a very practical program. And we used to meet once every month with the cohort. It was a 9 to 10 team member cohort, and it was very interesting to see the learnings from each and every person of them. And this was a preparation of the second line from the team members, so they can take over whenever needed. Rotation of leaders was an idea that also was implemented back in 2019. Where every unit head was given the role of the next unit head every quarter. So every quarter, the unit head will be a head of another unit until the end of the year. So every quarter, he's heading another unit. The reason for that is to give a pool of quick, let's say, replacements when needed, whether temporary or permanent, and also to give new insights and ideas for the new units that were not led by the other unit heads, and also to give some new perspective to myself and also to other unit heads and experience in other areas. The acting head of Sharia is very maybe a crazy idea. Whenever I left for training or for leave, I asked one of my unit heads to sit on my desk and use my chair and laptop and desk and use my extension number as well, and take whatever I mean decisions he would like to take. He has no limits on taking any decision on my behalf. Whatever I can take, he can take, which also means that he can launch new initiatives, start new projects, cook off new let's say schemes and so on. And I remember once when I came back, there was this initiative of the morning walk from 8 to 8:30 or 7:30 to 8. And when I came from leave, I don't come to office. I go to the park nearby to walk. So the guy who was heading the department was walking as he's the one who launched this initiative. And he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm following your initiative, sir. This is you were the head. I was your follower when you launched this initiative. So this was something maybe as an example of what happened, besides others, of course. The Sharia Leadership Challenge is actually something very, this was a bit scary for my unit heads. I told my unit heads, I will gather for you 70 chiefs, SVPs and VPs, like the top notch of the bank, and I will allow them to sit in one room and listen to you speaking about your strategy for your units. So consider your units being departments, and launch initiatives and speak about your next year's strategy. This happened in early 2019, giving a strategy for 1 year up to 3 or even 5 years in some cases. So the unit heads came up and spoke, and I put together 3 panels, a panel of chiefs from the bank to check alignment with the DIB strategy. Then I put a government panel to check alignment with the government strategy. Then I put together a panel of leadership gurus to check alignment with the best practices of leadership. And alhamdulillah, I was very happy that we gave silver and bronze and of course gold medals plus golden cups to winners. And the one who topped them was his strategy was sent to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed office to show how we are the first people who aligned to the government strategy at that year. In innovation, we did quite a few things. We did something which we call Sharia 10x. Sharia 10x is how we can multiply our KPIs by 10 and reach to that in 1 year. So let's say I deliver my answers to the queries in 2 working days. Now I need to multiply this by 10, which means I need to deliver in 2 hours, not in 2 days. So in this 10x, we brought football shirts, and we made every unit head shuffle the team members that will be with him. So all the team were mixed here and there. And then every unit head actually, we hosted them in a hotel, and we asked, and we have asked the bank staff to come and visit us in the hotel. So alhamdulillah, we had also a refereeing panel, and we asked them to follow Dubai 10x model. So again, we had 26 ideas coming up, and every team had to present 2 ideas only out of the 26. 26 was the collective number. So each team member or team leader presented the ideas, and once it was presented, there was a refereeing panel. We brought people from the United Nations, people from the AI industry, people from Dubai 10x as well, and we brought the innovator of the UAE and so on. And again, we celebrated with those who won, and it was a good opportunity for the bank staff as well to come and visit and see what's going on at our site. Sharia, I'll not take long. I'll go quickly now. I'll take 2 minutes for the rest of the presentation. Sharia Design Lab is a design lab that follows the design thinking model of MIT University, which is the famous way of explore, then express, then try, then prototype, or evaluate, then prototype, and then produce. So it was a way of brainstorming our ideas. We publicize our achievements through writing stories. So we had 3 to 4 authors in the department who wrote stories. One of the stories I wrote was about the alignment of life purpose to corporate strategy, and I also wrote a story about the Sharia 10x, and other people have wrote also other stories. We also encouraged everyone to film the initiatives so that we can publicize them in the social media. And also we had a Sharia tour, so I visited all the chiefs of the bank except for one, and I presented to them whatever we do, more or less this presentation that I'm showing you now. We also had the idea of bringing a Sharia expo in the department, but it didn't happen. Lastly, but not least, the customer experience. We have the 5-star scheme model where we rank and rate each and every unit and every service and every action we do by the 5-star scheme to give this 5-star customer experience to our customers. Although we are auditors and we are controlled, but we also have some customers, and they deserve to receive a 5-star service. Last but not least, the empty chair, Amazon's empty chair, Jeff Bezos. We purchased a white chair in a meeting room that had all black chairs, and no one was allowed to sit on this chair except if a customer comes to complain. And we always have in our minutes of meeting, one of the attendees is the white chair, the customer, where we express the opinion that he would have in whatever we discussed if he was available. So we are pretending there's a virtual customer that is there. By that, I end my presentation. And sorry, I took a bit long, but Dr. Saad told me you have to present everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Musa Houri. Without further ado, would you like to pass the floor to the other representatives from
Yes, please.
Dubai Islamic Bank?
Yes, please. Now I'd like to invite Brother Mohammed Saifullah Khan, the CEO of Dar Sharia, to present his part on documentation in Islamic finance, followed by Ahmed Haikal, who will present on profit distribution, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Without further ado, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Esteemed faculty members of INSIF, respected Sheikh Musa Houri, brothers and sisters, and first and foremost, but not least, Dr. Saad. Thank you for facilitating this wonderful interaction, as I would say, whereby we bring a bridge and we share our experiences with the leaders of tomorrow in Islamic banking and finance, which is yourselves. I'd like to take this opportunity to also express the core importance of Sharia documentation. My colleagues have highlighted the requirements and the dynamics of the Islamic finance industry. However, I would keep my discussion very much focused towards Sharia documentation. But before that, I would like to give you a small insight into Dar Sharia. Dar Sharia has been created by Dubai Islamic Bank as one of its primary arm to render Sharia consultancy to the outside world and share knowledge in terms of Islamic finance practices and also expertise. It was formed in 2007 as a pioneering initiative of the Dubai Islamic Bank. And by virtue of that initiative, you had a lot of know-how being shared with fledgling institutions or institutions which are wanting to come up with strategies to encounter the various challenges which were presented to Islamic banking and finance industry as such. Obviously, with the onset of High Sharia Authority, Dr. Saad has taken a lot of perspective into bringing about standardization and practices in the UAE. And Alhamdulillah, that has really supported the industry. And inshallah, we all as practitioners welcome standardization in Islamic finance industry as such. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to run a presentation, and I'm going to share my screen now. Just a moment, please. Just a moment. Having some challenges on the IT side. Apologies for this. But in the interim, while I'm sharing the screen, I would also like to take this opportunity to keep this discussion very open. And I definitely welcome questions, either in the comments section, whereby if you have any thoughts to share on the contents which I'm presenting now, inshallah, I'll be more than happy to discuss them with yourselves and take it forward, inshallah. Yeah. Just a second, please. Yeah. Yes, it's here. Thank you. Is that visible now to the team?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Thank you.
It is.
Thank you. Yes. Now, Sharia documentation obviously impacts the Islamic finance industry in more profound ways than we assume, right? And the purpose of this presentation would give you an insight into Sharia documentation, the various core risks impacting Islamic institutions, overview of Sharia non-compliance risk, Sharia documentation impact areas, and the very important part of my presentation is to give you an insight into the designing process for effective Sharia documentation. And lastly, we will see how an effective design of the Sharia documentation suite gives the desired results for the Islamic institution as such. Now, we all know what these documentation entail, but do we really understand the role which this documentation plays in Islamic banking and finance? Yeah. Any thoughts on the comment, please? I will be more than happy to take that as well. Okay. Now, the first primary role which these, thank you. The first primary role which documentation has in terms of is to form the basis of financial intermediation. Now we have the customers and we have the financial institutions. What brings together these two counterparties is the bridge, and that bridge is Sharia documentation. And at the same time, while it acts as a bridge between the customers and the bank, it also interfaces with the banking operations as such. So not only does the Sharia documentation entail and have a discussion between the counterparties, but it also has an interface with the banking operations of the Islamic institution as such. Also, one more aspect which we somehow overlook is that Sharia documentation acts as a barometer between as a measure for Sharia compliance as well. And it also, impacts on the stakeholders' reputation and also perception about the institution as such. Now, if you look at the various stakeholders which we have across the Islamic documentation, we have the Sharia supervisory bodies, which basically look into the oversight of the Islamic financial institution. We have the regulators and the Sharia bodies. For example, regulators like Higher Sharia Authority, and you have the SAC in Malaysia as well. They are the ones which are important stakeholders. And also international standard setting bodies like IOFI, IFSB, IFM, right? They impact, in a way, directly or indirectly, the state of Sharia documentation, which is probably followed in the industry or which is adopted by an Islamic financial institution. And then we have the internal Sharia documentation department, of the institution. Now, the internal Sharia department gives an overview of what the state of the documentation is in terms of the Islamic finance institution, and also the internal Sharia audit, which takes care of the ex post, review of these implementation of these Sharia documents. And then obviously we have the Islamic finance product team, which explains in great detail and looks into the actual product considerations of the Islamic finance documents. And obviously, Islamic financial institutions don't operate in a vacuum. We have the customers as well of the Islamic finance institutions, which have a stake to play in how a Sharia documentation is not only perceived, but also how they choose to interact with the financial institution. The next point is obviously the tools which Sharia scholars use to structure these Sharia documentation. The first one, obviously, we have the fact and why these tools are used. When we use the traditional Islamic structures and constructs, what happens is this may not necessarily fit into the current economic climate or the regulatory climate of a jurisdiction. Hence, Sharia scholars, when they are confronted by modern contemporary applications, they use maslaha, which is public interest, as form of structuring of Islamic finance products. Istisnan also. Talfiq is used when you have a modern day application requirement and you are required to come up with a solution which is to render it in a Sharia compliant manner. So piecing together the different rules and opinions from the various madhab, the Islamic finance stakeholders, and more specifically the Sharia scholars, use this to structure a very effective solution in terms of Sharia documentation. And obviously, you have heard about Darura being used in multiple transactions and while determining a solution based on the requirement need of the hour. So all these considerations, as we see the industry standardizing and as we see the social norms also evolving, we have industry stakeholders, or especially the regulatory bodies and the industry standard setting bodies, which basically are bringing together an alignment, in terms of the various tools, thereby giving more certainty to the industry and also comfort to the various stakeholders in terms of practices that are being adopted by Islamic financial institutions. You would have already noticed that way in the past, you had different institutions within a certain jurisdiction applying different documentation. And that has really, in a way, been brought to a more standardized platform. Having said that, I think if Dr. Saad will obviously, I'll invite him to comment at a certain point of time, is that there is still scope for Sharia documentation and structuring to be effectively innovated within that space. However, the parameterization is very much important for that innovation now, and in terms of bringing more certainty towards the industry, which will definitely help it grow and move forward, inshallah. Now, obviously, I'm sure you are familiar with the risks that impact Islamic banks, but nevertheless, for the purpose of our discussion, more specifically for the next part of my presentation, I would like to highlight these core risks and what these risks are, which directly or indirectly impact Sharia documentation. The first risk, obviously, is credit risk. Failure of a counterparty to meet its obligation under a product or transaction. Now, you will ask me, by the way, Sharia documentation probably only relates to operational risk. So why is credit risk being discussed? Since I told in the first part of my presentation that the Sharia documentation acts as the bridge between the customer and the bank. Although Islamic financial institutions may evaluate a customer internally, through a credit review parameterization or credit review policy in accordance with that. However, unless and until those mitigants are translated inside the documentation or form part of the Sharia documentation with which the Islamic financial institution interfaces with the customer, you will not be able to protect your interest from a financial perspective if this operates in a vacuum. Hence, the credit risk has to translate into meaningful product features or provisions within the documentation so that this risk is effectively mitigated. The next risk, obviously, is the liquidity risk, right? In terms of liquidity risk, this is the risk which a financial institution faces in terms of failure to meet its payment obligations. Now, obviously, when you have the treasury and backend, more so, this liquidity risk has to be mitigated at the Islamic treasury or ALM perspective, whereby they enter into Sharia compliant transactions so that they manage the liquidity in a much more effective manner, and they're able to address this risk as such. Hence, there is also the element of Sharia documentation whilst encountering and mitigating this very important risk for Islamic institutions. And then you obviously have operational risk. Now, this is a big one. In terms of operational risk, you have what we call as the Sharia non-compliance risk attached in this risk mitigant. Now, what is operational risk? Operational risk is the risk which an institution faces due to perhaps inadequate or failed operations processes or people in terms of implementing a particular Sharia structure or documentation, right? And this is a big one, as I said. So we will see a more structured breakdown of the Sharia non-compliance risk in the next part of my presentation. But as of now, we have to underscore that the Sharia documentation as such addresses this very important aspect of risk. Obviously, we have the market risk, which expresses the risk of loss due to movement in market prices. Now, obviously, this is also factored in at the level of the Islamic financial institutions, and they use techniques which are implemented obviously through documentation, which help them mitigate the market risk as such. Rate of return risk is obviously we operate in a climate whereby there's extreme volatility in terms of what happens in the benchmark rates on a day-to-day basis. So even this risk is mitigated through internal processes and Sharia compliant risk management tools used by Islamic institutions, which obviously have a direct bearing and are being implemented through Sharia compliant documentation. And finally, we have the equity investment risk, which is the risk assumed by institutions under investment structures like musharaka, mudaraba, wakala bil istismar. So these are the highlights of the 6 risks which impact Islamic financial institutions as such. Now let's look into further detail the Sharia non-compliance risk. Now, Sharia non-compliance risk, in a sense, is the risk which arises due to the failure of Islamic institutions in not adhering to Sharia rules, principles, or even fatwas from the financial institution. And this risk basically adheres, whereby, or rather is a non-adherence of the fatwas issued by the ISSC or the Sharia boards, and also the central Sharia bodies like the HSA, which has now mandated for the UAE to adopt IOFI principles across all products and services. The Sharia non-compliance risk may arise predominantly through a poor Sharia structuring and also a poor implementation towards documentation as such. And hence, this might expose the Islamic financial institution not only to customer attrition and also a bad reputation for the institution, but it may also expose the institution to one of those risks which we just highlighted there, and in addition also sanctions or penalties from the regulator as such. You also find that if you have poor documentation, you have customers obviously taking the financial institutions to court, because as I just mentioned, the bridge between an Islamic financial institution and the customer are the documentation. In case of going to courts and wanting to enforce their rights, Islamic financial institution on defunct documents will have substantial challenges in going to court and enforcing perhaps the collaterals, the securities, or even for that matter, the transaction documents, if it's poorly drafted or they do not comply with certain requirements which are set out in the principles of Sharia. Reputation is big. Islamic financial institutions, if they use poor documents, obviously, or poor failed processes, definitely expose the institution to reputation, and that may even include withdrawal of funds by the customer or have a very bad name market as such, not only in the local market but also in the Islamic market as such, because Islamic institutions don't operate in a vacuum. They operate within the Islamic financial system and also the global financial system as such. So in their interactions with each other, not only at the customer level, but also on a global or on an industry level, if you use poor documentation, then obviously it exposes the financial institutions to mundane practices at the institution itself, and also having challenges in encountering the various considerations which I just explained. Now, let's look at the Sharia documentation impact areas. Now, these are very important because Sharia documentations don't just, operate for the purpose of complying with the principle of Sharia. The various impact areas which have to be factored in while tailor-making the solution in terms of not only structuring the transaction, but also in providing the requisite Sharia documentation template and the whole stack of the Sharia documentation as such. Now, let's look at the first impact area. Obviously, the first one is the Sharia considerations. What are the Sharia considerations which impact, the documentation? First one is the Sharia requirement as such. What is the Sharia requirement? Which structure are you using? to, for example, if I use ijara as an underlying structure, for a home finance product, you have to use the ijara product as such. What are the rules? What are the cornerstones for using an ijara agreement? And what are the risks which are underlying such an agreement? And how you can mitigate those risks by using Sharia structuring, obviously not by combining contracts, by having parallel obligations or parallel structures to go along with that entire product suite, so that you're able to encounter these risks to a certain extent, obviously not exclude them per se, but to mitigate them. Sharia allows mitigation, or in fact promotes mitigation. However, not all ijara home products I've seen in the market from, say, within even a jurisdiction are the same. So there is a fair amount of sophistication on some levels, and there is not on some levels. Hence, you as a customer, as an institution, have to invest in understanding the exact impact areas and addressing them through effective Sharia structuring and documentation. The next important area are the legal considerations. Not only is your product supposed to comply with the fatwas of the institution, but also where the institution operates. What are the legal requirements within the institution? And what happens when this contract is challenged before the courts of the relevant jurisdiction? Will this stand the test of time? Will this document comply with the legal parameters as well? Hence, now, unlike what used to happen in the past with the growing, dominance of Islamic banking and finance, we are now faced, especially where you have Islamic banks functioning with conventional banks and jurisdictions, to ensure that you afford a certain level of clarity in your documentation, and you also are able to meet the legal requirements, so that tomorrow, when the contract is called into question, either by the counterparty or by any other stakeholder, you are able to stand and able to defend yourself in a legally compliant manner as well. Commercial considerations. What are these commercial considerations? The commercial considerations pertain to the actual intent, economic intent of the counterparties who want to engage in a particular transaction, or the exact features of a product which an Islamic institution wants to be made part of the transaction documents. I have seen in the past from personal experiences, whilst the intent is one, the Sharia documentation, not necessarily across various financial institutions, represent that intent being translated into the document. Is very important, obviously, that those features are embedded in the documents, obviously complying with the other core impact areas being the Sharia requirements and the legal considerations as well. In jurisdictions like Malaysia, we also have tax implications. Now with VAT also in the UAE, you have considerations of VAT. Now, all those also have to get translated into obligations in the transaction documents to make sure clarity is afforded to what can be some person's obligation under tax and what is the institution's obligation from a tax perspective. So this, in a nutshell, are the various documentation impact areas which have a direct bearing on Sharia documentation. If there are any thoughts, Brother Wan, I'm more than happy to take them as I speak. So please feel free to make this a very open kind of a discussion as opposed to a one-sided,
Sure.
Okay.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Sure. With pleasure.
Brother Muhammad, thank you so much. My name is Ali Bek from Kazakhstan. One question regarding Dana Gas Sukuk. What was it, like Sharia non-compliance risk or liquidity risk or something else? Can you elaborate on that?
I do not want to take this opportunity to speak in specific on a transaction. However, if you want to, the material is out there for yourselves to have a look at. But there are issues if somebody questions, but I'm going to take a step back and generally address this question in a very open manner. If a counterparty contends on a certain aspect, of a transaction or in relation to a documentation, there are various considerations of whether the counterparty is actually representing the actual factual case or is contending on a certain case, which then needs to translate into action. Now, for the purpose of Dana Gas, we all know that it did not, it ended up in restructuring, and hence you find in other transactions as well, which are called into question, most of the times these transactions don't see the full complete legal circle or judicial circle, so that the matter is determined in a more concrete manner, be appraised of. I've answered the question in a very generalistic manner, Brother Ali Beg.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? I'm more than happy to take that.
If I may, Brother Saifullah, before you delve into it further,
Yes,
I do understand that Mr. Ahmad Haikal is going to speak too on behalf of Dubai Islamic Bank.
Hello?
Is this correct? Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Brother Juan. I think
Yes.
Brother Ahmed is the line. Maybe some issue with
Yes,
the
yes,
with
yes. I'm in the line. Yes, yes.
All right. So it's I was asking Brother Saifullah whether Brother Ahmad Haikal is going to speak after you. Just to double check, Brother
Yes,
Ahmad
he
is on
is,
the line
but I'll
too.
wrap up very fast.
Right. No, it's okay. Just checking.
Yes, he
No
is.
worries,
He
just
is.
checking. No problem.
Thank you for the hint, Brother Juan. Hint taken. No, just kidding. So I'll move on the next part of my presentation, so that in the interest of time as well, I think I want to cover my presentation and also be able to give Brother Ahmad Haikal the time required to make his presentation as well. Okay. Now, this is one of the most important considerations of my whole presentation, and in fact, this forms the bedrock of my presentation. So I just want you all to see how I'm very much fascinated by this construct of design thinking, and how design thinking can be implemented in terms of Sharia documentation as well. So I've kind of drawn an illusion between this process, which is used for or rather an iterative, non-linear way of designing, which can be applied for producing effective Sharia compliant documentation. So it will be a very useful tool for you, the leaders of the future, to also consider whilst you embark on your journey in pursuit of excellence in Islamic banking and finance. The first and most important consideration is, please identify and understand the requirement of that relevant product or of the relevant transaction. It is very important, even before you set out to structure a solution, for us to understand what the requirement pertains to. What do the counterparties want commercially from the transaction? What is the intent of the financial institution in terms of structuring a particular product it wants to roll out? It's very important. You need to engage, which comes at a subsequent point of time, but firstly understand what this matter pertains to in terms of transaction or in terms of product. Evaluate the impact areas. We just saw what are the impact areas which basically have a direct bearing on Sharia documentation. So it's very much important, even before we start the process, to understand and evaluate the various impact areas. Now, once we have an identification or understanding of these considerations, we are able to then go towards defining the deliverables. What is the exact deliverable which is intended to be designed and which is needed to be documented through the Sharia compliant documentation? And also for that, you need to engage with the stakeholders. Each and every stakeholder needs to be engaged. In terms of customers also, probably a market survey also will definitely help. I know this is a kind of a definitively different approach, but I think whilst using this approach, you will come up with a more meaningful product which actually impacts the actual requirements and also addresses the expectations of the customer. Now, when I say engage with the stakeholders from a customer perspective, what I mean is find out what the market is doing in terms of addressing a certain solution. Find out what the customer wants in terms of an Islamic product while structuring a product. And then also at the same time, engage with the relevant stakeholders within an organization itself. Now, for example, if you're dealing with a retail product which needs to be rolled out, please, as Sharia structuring experts, we need to engage with the retail team to find out what are the exact features which this product is to articulate in terms of addressing this requirement. Also, not only create in a vacuum, but also find out, not only providing the documentations, also seamless integration into the implementation as well. Now, as we go in the past, we would have seen turnaround times used to be abundantly long and protracted. In fact, I remember in the past having advised on other financial institutions product. I mean, in terms of an auto murabaha, we found that there were as much as 5 customer interactions before the customer can actually avail, the car. So, whilst when we went ahead and inquired, he said, no, this is as per Sharia requirement. But obviously that the industry has evolved, right? And so we need to make sure we design the product in a very, very effective manner, and also define the parameters which go into the documentation and a number of steps, even from a implementation standpoint, to make sure we come up with a very meaningful product, right? So defining the deliverables is a very, very important step. After that, obviously, you have the ideation factor, and you ideate on the product and also structure the product, addressing the various impact areas, right? And then you align your documentation towards the defined deliverables, right? Now, obviously, you will sit up and say, hey, brother, but these considerations are only for new product development. Why would I use all these approaches even in case of existing products? Now, we use these approaches even for re-engineering existing products as well. Now, with the IOFI benchmarking, obviously, and in the UAE, financial institutions are revisiting some of their implementation and product documentation as well, So this process, which I'm just explaining, can be used very effectively in also designing your existing product documentation. So you can take your existing documentation and put it in the funnel and go through the same processes, while coming up with a requisite solution. The next, obviously, is the prototype, which is drafting and validating the Sharia documentation. When you draft and validate the Sharia documentation, what you do is you basically come up with the entire stack of the Sharia documents, which are required to implement the structure. And obviously that stack has to address all the core impact areas. Otherwise, you will come up with a really flawed output, right? And obviously, at this step, also, you need to go back and validate whether the output is compliant with the deliverables which you have defined for yourselves. And at the last, once the product is validated, you then take it and then test it against the defined deliverables. Whether is there any roadblock in the implementation process by virtue of you implementing this document, to make sure all the stakeholders are fully satisfied with the end product as such. Now, as I said, you can use this iterative and non-linear approach in terms of adopting or designing a new process towards approach in implementing Sharia compliant documentation. It'll definitely stand you in good stead. Let us finally look into how would this translate into efficient Sharia documentation. Firstly, you will be able to address what we call as a Sharia risk. The Sharia non-compliance obviously is a big one for Islamic finance institutions, and hence you will, using this iterative process, address Sharia risk considerations. Obviously, you will improve the operational efficiency of your product and also of your operations as such from an Islamic banking standpoint. You will be able to focus on serving not only the institutions, prerogative of having a very seamless integrated document, but you'd also be able to address the customer and client expectations in terms of the document by providing them a very focused output. Obviously, this also functions as a channel to create and deliver value, not only for an institution, but also for your customer. It better also interfaces and tools for the clients to interact with the customer services aspects of the services, more holistically integrated of Sharia grounds into the services as such. And with the growing incidence of digitalization to create usable and satisfiable customer experiences, this approach will definitely help you in reinventing the processes and making sure your end product complies with even this digitalization strategy. And obviously, the very most important thing, which we sometimes overlook and which is actually forms the bedrock of Islamic products, and is to clear and have a very clear, transparent product documentation, which has no interpretation issues, which has no gharar, which is able to translate to meet the expectations of all counterparties without any hidden loopholes in the documentation. So I guess if you embark on this iterative, non-linear strategy towards product documentation, you will be able to engage all your stakeholders and also at the same time meet the expectations across all levels. With that, I conclude. Thank you so much for patiently listening to my presentation, and I'm open to taking questions if so required. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Saifullah. Inshallah, towards the end, we will be having a question and answer session. So you can either collect them or just share them in the chat. Without further ado, we'd like to invite Brother Ahmad Haikal for his session on behalf of Darul Sharia as well. Without further ado, brother, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
Thank you very much for allowing me to or to give me this opportunity to speak about this very, very specific item in the Islamic banks, which is profit distribution. This profit distribution is a very, very sensitive and technical part of the Islamic bank, and is one of the most difference between the Islamic bank and conventional bank when they are distributing the profit instead of interest in the conventional banks. I will try my best to take you through the a quick journey about the profit distribution, because this is very, very, very technical part, and it will take time more than 1 or 2 workshops to explain. I don't know if you can see the screen or not.
No, yeah.
I try to share my screen. Anything appears in the screen?
Yes, you can see.
Yes. Okay.
All good, Brother Haikal?
Okay. Yes, all good. Now I will start with my contents, which is a source of funds invested in the common pool. In Islamic bank, there is 2 main sources of resources or sources of monies or funds invested in the common pool. These 2 main parties is coming from shareholders' equity. This is the first one, and liquidity products, which contain of current account, saving account, and term deposits. And all of this are combined together and invested in one common pool, which is the investment common pool in the Islamic banks. Let's see the chart of the resources. The source of funds coming from shareholders' equity and customer accounts, which current account. Current account is a money deposited from the customer. This account where the deposit is guaranteed by the bank. However, it is not possible to give any benefits having financial value to the customer. Current account is mainly based on a borrowing and lending concept between the customer and the bank. The money is guaranteed from the bank. That's why any benefits or any profit generated from this deposit amounts is going to the shareholders, not the customer. The second one is saving account and term of deposits. This amount are invested in the common pool based on mudaraba contract signed between the customer and the bank. In this relation, the deposits are received on the basis of unrestricted mudaraba. The depositors are Rabb al-Mal of or fund providers, and the bank manages this fund against pre-agreed share in the generated profit. Scope of investment of this money, bank as a fund manager or mudarib is permitted to invest the fund in any Sharia compliance or commercially transaction. Is it money is restricted or unrestricted? There is no restriction in respect of any specific area of business or virtual trade. Pre-agreed ratio, we mean that depositors and the bank are entitled to their respective pre-agreed share in the mudaraba profit. As we said before, the saving accounts and term deposit is based on mudaraba contract signed between the customer and the bank. What happened in case of loss? In case of loss or no loss, no profit situation, the mudarib will not receive the expected reward. Tiers and classes. Based on this principle and certain objective criteria such as size and tenure of the fund, different tiers and classes of the depositors are given different weightage. And we'll explain this concept furthermore in the coming slides. In mudaraba contracts, sometimes minimum balance required. The mudarib or the bank may stipulate a minimum balance requirement to enter into the mudaraba, or any balances below that limit should be considered as current account or card. That means it's not titled to take, the customer have no eligible to take any profit for this one, because this amount will be guaranteed from the bank. So the customer should not take any benefit for this. Responsibility of risk and loss. Risk of loss, damage, or destruction of the mudaraba asset is borne by the fund providers, while the mudarib shall not get the expected reward unless the loss is attributable to negligence or misconduct or breach of the terms of the contract by the mudarib, in which case the mudarib has to bear the loss. Now, the segregation between bank pooling of fund. Mudarib may allow pooling of the fund. Pool is generally called common pool, which is a pool that the money of the shareholders and depositors are mixed in and invested by the bank as mudarib. Segregation between depositors fund and the bank fund. Bank as a mudarib is required to keep the fund of the common pool separate from its own fund. All this money collected from shareholders' money, mudaraba, and wakala deposit, or other sources of fund are joined together in one common pool, and the bank as a mudarib, using his expert to invest this money through his through its activities in the bank, through retail finance, corporate finance, and other type of financing or investment. Now, how is the profit is calculated? Separate balance sheet for bank and the common pool and calculation of expenses. Common pool and bank separate entities. In principle, common pool and the bank should be treated separate entities and should have a separate balance sheet as separate entities, which is a common pool itself. It's a separate or independent entities, and the bank money also is independent fund. Cost, expenses, and P&L system should allow separate accounting and treatment of the transaction of common pool and the bank in their separate capacities. Treatment of profit and loss. Profit to be distributed as per the agreed ratio and in accordance with a weightage point. Losses to be borne pro rata by all depositors, accordance with by all depositors. Bank income. Bank income, the bank as a mudarib is earned the three different manner as follows. The bank as a mudarib has three sources of income. As a depositors, this is the first one, because he mixed his money with as a depositors, as he mixed his money in a common pool with depositors, which is a customer of the bank, on its own funds, such as equities, capital invested in common pool. It receives a profit as proportional. As a mudarib, this is the second source. It receives its share in the mudaraba profit as per the mudaraba contract. Third one, as a service provider, because the bank are providing service to the customer, it receives the fees and the commission as consideration of service provider to the customer. Now, how to calculate the profit? To calculate the profit, there is three steps. First one, to make a constructive liquidation of the asset of the mudaraba pool. Second one, you have to be sure that the capital is remain intact. No profit unless the capital remain intact, as a profit is what exceeds the mudaraba capital upon investment. Net profit. Total income from the common pools, Sharia compliance financing and investment activities in which is the fund of the common pool have been used should be calculated less the deduction. List of expenses to be deducted from the profit on common pool. The first thing is direct expenses. Direct expenses relating to financing and investment activities of the common pool, such as taxes, transportation, expenses of the good, insurance of the good, all these items should be deducted from or be calculated as a direct expenses. Provision, the provision for bad and doubtful transaction and investment in the common pool, which is related to the mudaraba asset, should be also calculated and listed as to be deducted from the profit. Depreciation of fixed asset in the common pool, such as assets leased on operating lease basis, if any. Expenses that should not be deducted from the gross profit in the common pool. Other expenses related to shareholders, because shareholders as shareholders as mudarib in the mudaraba has to bear the expenses, indirect expenses and other expenses related to his own activities. These items should not deducted and should be will be borne by the shareholders. Calculation of the shareholders fund. To calculate the profit or to distribute the profit after you have got the net profit, you have to calculate the shareholders fund separate than the depositors fund. Calculation of the shareholders fund in the common pool. The daily average balances for the following accounts would constitute the aggregate investment by the shareholders in the common pool. Shareholders equity fund, which comprise the paid-up capital, statutory reserve, and general reserve, and retained earning, if any. This amount or is this accounts is a part of shareholders fund. Fund belonging to customers and other parties, but guaranteed from repayment by the shareholders. As we mentioned before, like a current account of the customer is the money or the deposit money guaranteed by the bank, and the customer should not take any benefit for the bank as keeping this amount, and the bank is allowed to be allowed to take this amount and invest this amount to his own as a guaranteed amount. The following would be deducted from the total product, like current account and reserves with the central bank. All this amount would be deducted from the fund of shareholders, like current account and reserves with the central bank, because this amount is not invested in the common pool. So we have to deduct this amount from the fund of shareholders. Cash in hand, including the cash in the ATM, current account with other banks within the outside, fixed asset of the bank, investment made by the bank as an entity, subsidiaries, overseas branches, etc. All these funds, we have to calculate the fund of shareholders, which is only invested in the common pool. Now we will come to very important tools are using in profit distribution, which is the weightage. Mainly the depositors fund are mudaraba based, like saving account, term investment, and the current account weightage system. The bank offers different type of investment account keeping in view the different type of customer and their needs. For example, saving account, also time deposit, which is deposit for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. This amount are invested in the common pool for this period, and is not allowed for the customer to withdraw this money until notices for the bank to withdraw this amount. This difference between the amount of the deposit and the term is maturity of the time deposit are based on this principle. The bank, with approval of Sharia board, has devised a system whereby it has assigned different weightages to different segments of the customers based on availability of the fund for the investment. Upon profit distribution, the customer received profit keeping in view the weightages assigned to them. Another tool are using in profit distribution to make the profit smoothing technical. The bank may, in order to ensure that the investor receive profit even in the period where the common pool does not perform well, may establish a reserve called a profit equalization reserve. PER, or profit equalization reserve, will be used to increase the profit level of in future, and will also be treated as a reserve for the benefit of all investors, including the depositors and shareholders. Another type of reserve is also maintained for a benefit of depositors only, which is different than the PER, because the PER, or profit equalization reserve, is for the depositors and shareholders. And this reserve is taken care before the distribution happened between the shareholders and depositors. This type of reserve also maintained for the benefit of depositors only, and it's called investment risk reserve. IRR, or investment risk reserve, is available for distribution amongst the depositors only, and the bank cannot benefit from the same. All these tools, even weightages, let us roll up the profit distribution. Let us say that there is two main sources of the money or the fund invested in the common pool. First one is the shareholders amount, shareholders money, and the second one is the depositors money, and the bank has collected this money together, his own money, which is shareholders money, and the depositors money, as pair or based on the mudaraba contract. The bank is the mudarib in this contracts, and the customer is Rabb al-Mal. The bank is mixed this money and invested until generated the profit. After that, the bank is distributed the profit between the shareholders and customers or depositors as per the fund of each one. He calculated the fund of the shareholders, calculated the fund of the depositors, and using some tools to perform the adjusting between the two parties. Are using the bank are using the weightage as per the some criteria, and as per approved by Sharia board or higher Sharia, the internal Sharia supervisory board. Another tool is using is reserves. The bank are using two reserves. The first one for the benefit of two parties, shareholders and depositors. Second reserve is the benefit of depositors only, which investment risk reserve. And after that, sometimes the bank is using the final tool, which is HIBA, to the depositors. Another tool, this is the third one, or technique used by Islamic Bank in the finalizing the profit and its distribution. This tool is HIBA to the depositors. Why the bank is sometimes using the HIBA? HIBA, the reason behind giving HIBA to depositors is that since Islamic Bank are competing, which is a conventional bank, they are working in a parallel. The bank may take this tactic or technique to give money as a HIBA from shareholders to depositors to compete in the market, because Islamic banks want to prove that they are able to compete the conventional bank. This is my also we are using.
Sorry to interject, Brother Haika, if I may ask your opinion. We
Yes,
have a question in the chat box. Would you like to address this question now before we transfer to Emirates NDB Islamic slot, or would you like to answer it towards the end, Brother Haika?
Yes, I can. Please.
Okay, sure. Would it be okay, Brother Haika, sorry to cut you off? After answering this question, we proceed with the next slot. Would that be okay? I sincerely apologize for the lack of time.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
so the question in the chat box, maybe briefly, Brother Haika can address and clarify to us. How will the bank ensure Sharia compliant on existing and future products, given the adoption of AOFI Standard 59 by UAE Central Bank? Without further ado, Brother Haika, maybe you'd like to shed some light on this?
The bank is are reviewing the new products in light with the new resolution or new notices, Sharia standard of 59, to be sure that all the requirement of the standard are taken care in the products, and if there is anything is missing, we have to inform the Higher Sharia Authority of UAE that we have this gap, and we're trying to find a solution or to find another alternative using an Islamic bank to mitigate the risk of non-compliance issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Haika, for that brief clarification. Again, sincerely apologies from INSEF due to lack of time. I was following the discussion, but even I overlooked the clock. Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Haikal. On behalf of INSEF, I would like to thank Dubai Islamic Banks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the time is very tight, and it's the subject is very wide and need more time.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. I hope that I give some brief about the profit distribution mechanism using in Islamic banks.
Inshallah, I hope this would also lead to further.
Thank you.
Wa iyyakum, Brother Haikal, wa iyyakum. I hope this would lead to other future collaborations between the university and the bank. In the postmortem evaluation for this event, inshallah, I would be proposing so that we can have a more time designated session so that we can hear to the extensive story behind it all.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much, Brother Haikal. Inshallah, thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Most welcome. Thank you, gentlemen, for a Sunday tour from Dubai Islamic Bank. Without further ado, brothers and sisters, we will continue our virtual industry visit with a presentation and a virtual tour from Emirates NDB Islamic Bank, represented, led by Mr. Anas Jafar, followed by Mr. Hani Helmi and Ms. Asma Al-Tajir. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Mr. Anas. Are you here with us? All right.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Thank you very much for being here today. I think I'll keep my presentation for a bit later. Our sister Asma she is a senior director in our ALM team, and today is her day off because she has to be there on Fridays to deal with international markets. But she has been kindly waiting for the past maybe hour just to give the presentation. So just keeping in mind her family time and so on, I'll just leave the floor to her to give a presentation on Islamic ALM, and then I'll continue, inshallah, with my presentation on the window. So Asma, if you want to start. Brother Hisham, the presentation is with you because we don't have access to Zoom from our network. So if you could display the ALM or Islamic framework presentation, not the one that is, no, not this one, the other one, if you don't mind.
The one with Miss Asma.
Okay.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Very clear, Miss Asma?
Yeah, perfect. I'll just wait for the presentation to load.
Okay, please wait.
Are you showing the presentation?
I think it's loading up.
It's loading. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
This one?
All right.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to briefly discuss a recent project we have completed, which involved establishing an ALM Islamic framework on the back of a circular sent out by the UAE Central Bank. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this standard came out towards the end of 2020, and the central bank has a requirement now for financial institutions that house an Islamic window. And what the regulation stated is that the institution housing an Islamic window must establish an ALM framework for the management of Sharia compliant assets and liabilities. They need to ensure sound and prudent management and ring fence the Sharia compliant assets and liabilities from the conventional. The framework should demonstrate a clear segregation between the Sharia compliant assets and liabilities. And there needs to be separate product codes for the Sharia compliant products mapped with specific general ledger accounts. The institutions needed to also develop an approach to the mechanism of financing and funding between the Islamic window and the institutions. And that approach, which was developed by the banks that are housing the Islamic financial window, that approach needs to be reviewed and approved by the bank's internal Sharia supervision committee, as well as by the central bank. So this was in just the central bank requirement that we received. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what was the expectation from this requirement? What did we need to achieve and put in place in order to comply with the central bank requirement? We needed a formal balance sheet, a formal Islamic balance sheet with a P&L reporting structure. The Islamic assets and liabilities needed to be booked through the Islamic window ledger. And we needed to put in place this formal ALM framework for Emirates NDB Islamic to deploy its excess liquidity and to fund requirements needed to be in place. Now, essentially, what does that mean? The Islamic assets and the liabilities needed to balance at the end of the day, and we needed to put a mechanism in place in order to achieve this. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So the process, how did we actually go about achieving this? A working group needed to be established. Different departments needed to be involved, and we had to involve the asset and liability management team, that is my desk, Emirates NDB Islamic, governance and finance departments, IT as well. All the Islamic assets and liabilities needed to be booked through the Islamic window ledger. So first of all, we needed to do a deep dive and identification. We needed to look at all the products booked in the different departments, in the different systems. It all needed to be identified. And I'll give you an example. At Treasury level, we had a Sukuk portfolio, which was sitting with the investment desk at Treasury. That was not mapped to the Emirates NBD Islamic window. So the same had to be identified and migrated across to the Islamic window, and it reflects as an Islamic asset on the Emirates NBD Islamic balance sheet. Another example, Treasury direct dealing Islamic clients who provide funding via murabaha structures. So for example, interbank and non-banking financial institutions. These transactions were initially booked directly between client and between Emirates NBD, and they needed to be migrated to the Islamic window to reflect on the balance sheet as an Islamic liability. Of course, all of this involved the creation of Islamic books where required and linkage to the Emirates NBD Islamic ledger. Not only did we need to put this in place to ensure all new deals were booked and linked correctly, but we needed to go back and look at all outstanding deals and migrate the same across. So a formal ALM framework for Emirates NBD Islamic was put in place to manage the Islamic balance sheet. That was the requirement from the central bank. So how did we go about that? Excess liquidity raised by Emirates NBD Islamic was placed with ENBD using murabaha placement. Now, in order to be able to do this, at Emirates NBD level, at the conventional entity level, we needed to identify non-interest bearing assets to be compliant with IOFI Standard 30 on Tawarraq. And the Article 3.2 basically states that the institution should not perform monetization for the benefit of conventional banks, where it discovers that such banks are going to use the liquidity for interest-based lending instead of Sharia compliant operations. So hence the funds, the Islamic funds that we received from Emirates NBD Islamic, it could be placed with Emirates NBD conventional, subject to us identifying these non-interest bearing assets so that we were compliant with IOFI Standard 30. On the other side of the balance sheet, any funding requirement by Emirates NBD Islamic, so this is where you have a balance sheet and you look at your assets and your liabilities and you don't have sufficient liabilities on the Emirates NBD Islamic balance sheet, those funds could be obtained from Emirates NBD through mudaraba structure. This involved, in fact, the entire process involved drafting and putting in place documentation, such as the internal mudaraba documents and the master murabaha agreements we have in place. And this is how we are now compliant with the central bank requirements. Thank you. I finished my part of the presentation. I think I stuck to my time management, and I would like to invite my colleague Anna now to speak.
Thank you very much, Ms. Asma.
Maybe if there is any specific question related to ALM, so that we can, Asma, if you, after that, if you wanna, just
may I check
leave.
the chat? So far, no questions yet. Would you like to leave a few minutes for the audience to ask their questions, or would you like to proceed?
I'm fine with both options. I leave it to you, Brother One, to see how you want to take it forward.
I think we should proceed because there are no questions yet. I'm running short of time, and out of respect for your time too. Without further ado, by all means, Mr.
I mean,
Anas.
sorry, if there are any questions, we can always answer them separately and refer back.
Okay. Sure thing, Ms. Asma. Will do. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Asma, again for your time, and we'll proceed. So, salamat datang, everyone, and thank you very much, Shani, for being here today. I'm very excited to be here. I mean, 10 years back, I was sitting in your place. I myself was an Islamic banking student, master student, and I did a field trip visit to Malaysia, to your country, to a beautiful country. And this is where I was able to meet a lot of institutions. So I can perfectly relate to what we're doing today. And at that time, we were still blessed not to have this COVID issue. So we were able to travel. Alhamdulillah, we met with Bank Negara, IUM, We did not get a chance to meet NCF, but we met ISRA and a lot of other local organizations, and we had a very warm welcome from Malaysian people. So thank you very much for that again. Today, I think I'll just, I have a presentation if Brother Hisham can show it. And I'll try to take you through this presentation. Of course, it's just for reference purposes, and I'd like to make this session a little bit interactive and try to answer your questions. As I rightly say, as I said before, I mean, I currently head the Islamic window for Emirates NDB, and I'm an Islamic banking student or myself. And one of the first thing I learned when I was when learning Islamic banking or Islamic finance is that in fiqh al-mu'amalat, the rule is ibaha, right? So you can do anything you want as long as it's not clearly forbidden. And this was like my always motto when I was dealing with Islamic products, saying that at no point in time I should stop something or say no to a customer that wants or has an interest in dealing with an Islamic products. I need to find a solution for him and provide them with the product. So Brother Hisham, if you can move to the next slide. I mean, I'll just quickly introduce the Islamic window and then quickly tell you about what the products we do with few examples of how we can leverage the innovation aspect. Maybe then take you through give you a quick glimpse of the Sharia governance framework. I think no one of the other brothers discussed it before, so it's good also to see what are the efforts done by Brother Saad and the central bank that are really thanked for whatever they have done over the past few years in really taking this industry to another level in the UAE. And finally, if time permits, there's a small case study where I'll try to pick your brains a little bit here. So if we can go to the next slide. So Emirates NBD Islamic is the Islamic window of Emirates NBD. Emirates NBD, I mean, you might have heard about it here in the UAE. It's like as famous as Nike or any other brand. And it's like, it's maybe one of the largest bank in the UAE and in the region as well. The asset book as of end of Q1 were almost 700 billion dirhams. And we have been, I mean, present in a lot of other countries such as KSA, Singapore, London, India, Egypt, name it. So our window is also present in the UAE, in KSA, London, and in Singapore, where we try to provide our Sharia compliant offering to our products. As we also own an Islamic bank, which is Emirates Islamic, but that is independent from the Islamic window. And here in the Islamic window, we mainly focus on corporate, institutional, investment banking, and global market and treasury products. So we try to be as innovative and independent as possible. And one of the important things being part of Emirates NBD as a conventional bank, I think that's one thing I keep repeating. See, I'll just take you a step back. I graduated from a French university in Islamic banking. So I've always been in an environment that was against Islamic finance or against Islamic banking. So criticism has been my everyday story from the day I started working in this industry. And one of the criticism I hear working in a window is that, oh, you're in a conventional bank. Oh, how are you ensuring this and so on? So, I mean, the Sharia governance is one aspect. I like to see our presence in a conventional bank as an advantage. Being part of one of the largest institutions in the region, you can use their muscles to achieve almost anything. And when I say that, you can look at a bank like Emirates NBD that has invested 1 billion dirhams in digitization and technology and see how you can leverage it to make use of it to develop the Islamic banking industry. And this is something I keep repeating to my colleagues and to people outside. See, without the efforts done by these conventional banks, conventional window, or this Islamic windows of conventional bank, I think we cannot take it a step further and try to achieve something. If can go to the next slide, if you don't mind, Brother Hisham. So we try, as I said, to be as innovative as possible and to try to focus on digitization. I think these are the two main terms that you might hear in my presentation. Let's go to the next slide. That I don't try to save time here. So asset products, we offer all type of asset products, as I told you, Yani, with a big focus on corporate and institutional banking. So it goes from to ijara structure. As you might be aware, the UAE industry is has a lot of concentration in real estate. So we have a lot of ijaras and forward ijaras, but we also have tawarruq and other products. one of the example I'd like to bring here, and that might be interesting to deal with, and to see how we leverage on the development of, or on the technology that we have, is what we did for trade murabahas. So as part of our trade murabaha, when I was a student, and even when I came into the industry, one of the main issues that we hear in trade or in murabahas is documentation from one end, how customers will keep executing, and also Sharia compliance, how you ensure timely execution and so on. So here in Emirates NDB, and we have developed a digitization of our trade murabaha execution. So today, for example, if one of our customers wants to import the goods that will be on a murabaha or on a waqf murabaha basis, basically what we offer him today is that through a certain system that we have developed, the offer acceptance can directly be automated and it generated from system, and he can directly accept it from his mobile phone or computer. And this for me was very interesting, because not only it reduces the whole documentation and the issues that we might have heard of previously in the past, but it also ensures Sharia compliance. How is that? I mean, when you do a murabaha through a machine, you have the timestamp directly. You don't need to worry about, was it before the goods arrive? Was it after the goods arrive? And this simplifies the process after that, even for our Sharia auditors and so on. So this was a clear example of how we leverage technology to be able to the advantage of Islamic banking and Sharia compliance. If we can go to the next slide. On the liability product side, we also offer any type of products that majority of the products that we can see in that our customers need. So it goes from a simple current account to savings and call accounts, but also all types of deposits, mudaraba, wakala, and murabaha based. See here again, we try to leverage on our systems to make it as smooth as possible for our customers in terms of notices, in terms of systems, in terms of statements, and so on. And one other element is that we try to keep our products and leverage on the Sharia compliant features of the contract to make the products more attractive to the customers. For example, on the mudaraba, just by using the weightage concept, you can create a product that is a tiered-based call account or a tiered-based savings account, meaning that the higher the balance customer keeps with you, the more rewards he should get. And that's, I think, something that will be encouraged from Sharia. And where I have my brother Sharia scholars, and mashallah, in this call, they can also comment on this. So that was one of the things that we tried to use and see how we can reach this subtle mix between Sharia compliance and customer experience, customer needs. If we might go to the next slide, please, Valeria. Investment banking and capital markets, of course, Emirates NDB is one of the largest players when it comes to investment banking and capital markets in the UAE. So we do all types of syndicated financing, be it at on origination side, distribution, and agency. So we also act as an agent for other banks. And our DCM team also does a lot of sukuk, but I'll leave this part to Brother Hani, who's going to be giving a proper presentation on how sukuk goes from A to Z. In 2020, just to give you a number, our sukuk issuances represented 40% of the total issuances done by our investment bank team. So the number is not small when it comes, because even on the conventional part, we're quite active. If you might go to the next slide, brother. Global markets and treasury, of course, I mean, as any other international large bank, apologies. We also, the GMNT forms a vital part of our Islamic offering. So it goes from the ALM that our was discussing before, but also all the hedging products, being from the profit rate swaps to more structured product and exotic products that I'm be happy to discuss with you separately without going into too much details here. Next slide, brother. One very important element is the Sharia governance. So as I was saying, in 2020, we had two very important regulations that came from Central Bank of the UAE, which are the Sharia governance framework for Islamic financial institutions, which means banks and windows, and then a specific framework for Islamic windows. And this was very important because, I mean, there's two ways to look at a regulation. It's either you look at it as a way that it makes my heart difficult, my life difficult, and I have to comply and so on and audit, etc. or you look at it as a legitimacy, so something that makes your work more legitimate. And I think that's the right way to look at it. I mean, that's my view. I don't see that. So we took it as an opportunity to make sure that today no one can say, no, you're a window, so you don't have a proper Sharia governance, or you're less Sharia compliant, or some kind of Sharia competition between the banks, which is not healthy and is not good in this environment and doesn't help anyone. So I tried to summarize some of the requirements of the Sharia governance framework. It's available online, and I think Brother Saad can be asked for hours about this text. It's one of his babies, I think. So we have a 3 lines of defense approach, with the Islamic window acting as the first line, the internal Sharia control headed by Brother Hani as the second line, and then the internal Sharia audit with all independent reporting lines. So we don't have any kind of pressure from the business or from anyone, and they can take their decision in a very independent manner. We have a 5 members internal Sharia supervision committee. 4 have been appointed, and the 5th is currently being appointed. Of course, a lot of senior management and board of directors has now been made responsible of Sharia compliance, which is something new. So we have our board of directors, a lot of board committees and senior management are now fully responsible for this. We ensured awareness across the organization when it comes to Sharia by doing a lot of bank-wide e-learning and continuing to promote this awareness. We published our ISSC's fatwas. We ensured the full segregation of books between the window and the bank, just like our sister Asma was discussing. And we developed an Islamic ALM framework and many other small tasks related to this Sharia governance. I think these are some of the important points that, I mean, provide confidence and make the Islamic banking industry in general and our Islamic window much more robust in terms of Sharia compliance. That's for the Sharia governance. Now, I think I still have 2-3 minutes, so I'll just use a small case study. So I think today what I wanted to do is like try to pick your brains a little bit on this one. See, people, as I said, there's 2 ways to look at regulations or to look at new Sharia standards. It's either you look at it in a positive way and try to build on it, or you're just negative and say, no, this makes my life hard and difficult. So if you can go to the next slide, brother, sorry, the case study. Yeah. So one of the recent things that came is the discontinuation of LIBOR. So you might have heard about it due to some scandals that happened with LIBOR manipulation. I mean, these are some more industry-wide things. The regulator in UK and some other regulators decided to discontinue these rates and are coming up with risk-free rates that are based on actual transactions. Of course, the nature of these rates are not forward-looking, they're backward-looking. So all the rates we had in the past, like IBOR, LIBOR, whatever, are all forward-looking. So you can have a term rate. These rates are backward-looking in nature. So you can only know the rate after day or few days, just a few days before. Now this creates a bit of an issue with some of our products, especially Murabaha contracts, where the profit rate, sorry, with Murabaha contract, where the deferred sale price has to be known upfront. So now we have transaction that needs to be converted to these rates. So I'd like to ask you, how can we do that? And I'll leave the floor to you guys.
So for this
So
case
brother
study,
one, if you want to take some questions.
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
If you don't mind,
so,
let's take some responses.
Right. So we open the floor to the audience, whether you want to participate in the case study or you have any general questions you'd like to ask, please feel free to do so. You can either just unmute yourself, or you can type out your responses in terms of questions or in terms of ideas in the chat box.
I hope I did not make you sleep. It's still early in Malaysia.
We would like to give the floor to the audience in terms of increasing the participation. Anyone?
Or maybe we want to give them some time to think over it and come back to it at the end after Brother Hani's
We could do
presentation.
that.
I'm also fine. I'm also fine with the approach.
All right, thank you, Brother Anas.
Then Brother One. And then I'll leave the floor to Brother Hani, who is our head of internal Sharia control and will be giving a presentation about Sukuk and Islamic DCM.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh wa iyyakum. Before we proceed with Brother Hani's slot and session, I remind that if the audience have any questions or would like to respond to the case study just now, feel free to do so and include them in the chat box. Without further ado, please, Brother Hani, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brother One. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. I'm honored and humbled to be a speaker in this web seminar. I'd like to thank INSIF for this opportunity, and I'd also like to thank Dr. Saad Baqali and the Central Bank of the UAE for help assisting and facilitating in making this happen. For the class of the Masters of Islamic Finance in INSIF, I'd like to congratulate all of you for making this choice. And you are indeed the future of the Islamic finance industry. And we perceive that there'll be a lot to come out of you in the future. Now, coming to Sukuk. Sukuk is a very interesting concept. I think in 2019, there was around $145 billion worth of Sukuk issuances in 1 year. In 2020, the number is probably around the same number, probably a little higher. Sukuk as a concept is again used from two dimensions. One is a dimension where it is an investment, and it acts as it's basically an alternative for investing in bonds. For investors who are concerned or would like to have their investments comply with their own faith, Islam in this particular case. Now, if you look at the other dimension where it is a form of financing to a specific corporate entity or government or otherwise, you would see that it is a form of Islamic finance that has a different aspect to it. So I'm perceiving that you understand the basic modes of finance and investments in Islamic finance. So murabaha, ijara, mudaraba, investment agency, and so forth. Having said that, you would also understand how an Islamic bank, generally speaking, would conduct or perform any of those financing transactions or investment modes. Now, in case of small transactions, $100,000 or below, 1 million, even $10 million, probably a bank will just finance this deal, and you know, it's a simple bilateral deal. It complies with Sharia standards to the maximum extent. However, if the number or the size of the deal grows, let's say, to $100 million, this is a point where certain banks might continue with it as a bilateral deal. Some would say, well, we probably want to do it as a club deal. Let us involve another bank. And this is where the same transaction is performed, except that it's done as a club deal between two banks, where one of the banks would appoint the other as its investment agent to conduct that transaction. So eventually the financing party to this specific transactions is those two banks. Now, if it's a little bigger, like maybe, I don't know, $200-300 million, they might even go ahead and say, let's do a syndication where 3 or more banks will actually participate in financing this deal. As the number grows, there's a possibility that, when you hit $500 million, $1 billion, $2 billion, then it makes more sense to tap the financing or the investment capital for this specific financing need from the market. This is where you get into a public transaction known as a sukuk, where the transaction is announced for via a prospectus, where potential investors are invited to commit to such an investment across a specific small period of subscription period, maybe a month or so. And if they do commit, subscription proceeds are collected from those investors, pooled, and these funds through the trustee or the issuer, who is a special purpose vehicle issued for the purpose of performing this transaction, would actually use such funds to conduct the same transaction, whether it's a musharaka, mudaraba, etc. Now, at the end of the day, you can easily see that or tell that it is the same ijara mutabik tamlik transaction, except that it is actually financed by the public. So these group of investors, their funds are the funds used to finance this specific transaction. So when you look at the actual underlying transaction of the sukuk, it needs to be an Islamic finance mode of investment or finance, as is the case with any finance that you would do for a retail customer or corporate customer in a bank. But considering it's a bigger size transaction and the fund size is quite bigger, this is where market tap issuance would be considered. Having said that, there are other concepts that would relate to a sukuk compared to a bilateral deal or even a syndication. Now, you wouldn't, for example, worry about tradability of a finance transaction or a syndication, but in terms of a sukuk that requires to be listed in a stock exchange or any financial market, you would want to have the tradability requirements met from a Sharia perspective. So, for example, if the underlying transaction is purely a single commodity murabaha, which would mean that the underlying assets at day one after concluding the murabaha contract is effectively a debt. Now that debt represented by a sukuk certificate cannot be traded from a Sharia perspective except at a price equal to the underlying debt or the proportionate common share in that underlying debt. So if the sukuk face amount is, let's say, $100,000, and this was used to buy a specific asset and sold by way of murabaha at let's say $20,000 across 5 years, yielding around 4% a year, you would realize that this debt is represented by the certificate. So the certificate effectively means you are owed a murabaha receivable for $120,000 per certificate. Now, if you want to sell that certificate from a Sharia perspective, it cannot be less or more than $120,000. Now, if you think about that for a moment from a pure commercial perspective, you would realize that, you know, if you issue that certificate or if you invest in that certificate as an investor, and you go along and say, well, I want to sell it, and because it represents a debt, I can only sell it at $120,000, right? Good luck with that. So you go into the market, well, nobody would buy it at above $101,000 if you're lucky. And, you know, even if you try to convince your friends that, you know, buy it at $120,000 because this is a Sharia requirement, 99% would just say no, maybe 100%. So it becomes a commercial constraint. Now, if you need to liquidate and you need to sell below the $120,000, which is possible commercially speaking, you would basically be in a situation where you do not comply with the principles of Sharia. Now, when it comes to Sharia scholars reviewing sukuk issuances, I do not remember any murabaha, pure murabaha based sukuk, except that there was one that was to be issued probably back in 2013. And then there's a lot of controversy around how could you have a murabaha sukuk listed on a stock exchange, and that kind of spiraled into so many different things, calling for further regulatory reforms and so forth for the Islamic finance industry, etc. But at the end of the day, it was approved, and it was approved by many Sharia scholars on the notion that they put a disclaimer on the certificate that you cannot trade this certificate unless at a value represented or equal to the represented debt or the debt it represents. Now, having said that, you do have a concern. So most of the Sharia scholars say, well, you need to have an underlying tangible asset that can allow for a different price as compared to either the asset it represents or the combined set of asset it represents as well as the receivables it may represent. However, the tangibility ratio should not be below previously 33%. Recently, there was an IOFI standard 59 that was issued that set the minimum starting requirement at 50%. And whoever is managing the fund, in case that fund drops to below, in terms of tangibility ratio, to below 50%, the trustee has to, through its agents at least, undertake to increase the tangibility as comprised in the sukuk assets to 50%, and in the advent or situation where this drops to below 33%, that sukuk needs to be delisted. So these are concerns so that we avoid trading in debt. Now you might wonder, why is this a concern and why do we have to go so far to achieve this? Well, it's again because and that's the underlying concept of all Islamic finance transactions, is to avoid usury in any form, or riba. Now, if I go back to the example of the murabaha sukuk, where the certificate at a issuance capital of $100,000 later on represents $120,000 of a receivable murabaha debt, and you decide that I want to sell it in the market for $100,000. So effectively what you're doing at that point is you are foregoing a receivable of $120,000 for $100,000 you receive cash, and the other party receives $100,000, gives you $100,000 cash for $120,000 receivable he would receive across the next 4 or 5 years. And that is basically something that tantamounts to a loan with interest, and hence the prohibition. So again, you'll see that in sukuk issuances being issued, nowadays, they would most probably have a 50% tangible asset investment or underlying transaction, like an ijara muntahi bit-tamlik, where we buy asset, lease it by way of ijara muntahi bit-tamlik, or a service agency structure whereby we actually purchase assets, even if owned by the obligor, and we appoint the obligor as a service agent to service these assets, collect rental proceeds and so forth on behalf of the issuer who is acting on behalf of the certificate holders. Having those structures combined with a 50%, for example, commodity murabaha, so basically it would support and aid and facilitate in the issuance of a tradable sukuk instrument. Now one would say, why not go all ijara or all service agency? Well, it would become limiting. So let's say an entity has, let's say, $1 billion worth of real estate asset that it can sell and lease back on ijara muntahi bit-tamlik or run on service agency basis. That would be the limit it can have for sukuk issuances under a sukuk program. However, if you go with a 50-50 approach, then they can actually have double the value of these assets under sukuk issuance program, and hence have double the financing amount that they can need from sukuk issuances to grow their corporate activity. So that is one concept that is very relevant to sukuk, and it's become very, very important that the IOFI, the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions in Bahrain, has decided to issue a standard, Bi'ad-Dain 59, or sale of debt, and they have covered this aspect comprehensively. Although it was previously covered, they have referred that anything in 59 relating to tradability would supersede prior reference to the concept in the IOFI standards. So sukuk, in terms of documentation, I think Brother Saifullah was talking about documentation and how that works out, and that was very well laid out. When these are done or drafted by legal counsels, we have to review those in internal Sharia control departments in Islamic banks in the UAE per the requirements of the Sharia governance standard set up or issued by the High Sharia Authority of the Central Bank of the UAE. And that is a very comprehensive task. It's basically like going through 600-700 pages, sometimes all the way up to 1,000 pages of documentation. Now, again, following the concept of al-Muslimuna ala shurutihim illa shartan ahalla haraman aw harrama halalan, it's a concept of going through a comprehensively detailed set of documentation considering the size of the transaction and ensuring one clause at a time that it is Sharia compliant, and if it is something new that wasn't there 1400 years ago, that it is something that can comply with the principles of Sharia based on the relevant underlying transaction structure or not. And if it's not, either you flag that as showing the observation or the comment or on how that does not comply, and preferably show a solution as to how you can make this comply to make things easier for concerned parties involved. This is from a compliance review perspective. Once these are reviewed, we usually have to submit those to our internal Sharia Supervisory Committee, ISSC, who in turn would give the final resolution as to whether an issuance complies with Sharia or not. And if it does, from their perspective, they do issue a signed fatwa to be made part of the prospectus. And this is a very critical document to issue a Sharia compliant sukuk, well, globally generally, and more so in the UAE. So this is just in a nutshell. Now, I can talk about sukuk for days. If there's a specific aspect of sukuk you'd like to know more about, I'm happy to see if there's something specific you'd like to know more about, and I'll be more than happy to talk further about that.
Sure, thank you, Brother Hani. Maybe we can open the floor for any suggestions or questions for Brother Hani.
Sure, please.
All right, maybe we can leave a few minutes for them to respond. Would that be okay, Brother Hani?
Sure.
In terms of your question on sukuk, I'm sorry, sorry to cut you off. Sorry to speak over you. You were saying?
Sorry, how many minutes do I have left?
I think we can commit to another 5 minutes. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if they like to have or ask questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Mm-hmm. So maybe give them a few minutes to respond. Give them the chat box maybe. Let me check.
Brother Ashraf?
Yes, yes.
Brother Hani, can I ask a question with Brother Hani?
Please, please.
Sure, please.
Assalamualaikum, Brother Hani. Thank you very much
Brother
for
Tarmizi, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, please.
Thank you very much for the very insightful and also informative information on how the sukuk is implemented. I would like to know on construction side or even investment side from other countries that uses sukuk fund subscribe from the bank from your organization. I mean, is there any, and has there been any issues in terms of what you call that currency rate or whatsoever? Because my company have started to go into MENA, Middle East regions, and we would like to know more if there are any possibilities and chances to go into. Yeah. That's
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed, for asking your question. This is more of a commercial matter, and I think usually there are US dollar denominated sukuk issuances, and usually these are globally acceptable So usually in most of the countries, you'd see that they do have the availability of investment in USD. And by that, basically your investment would be in dollars, your returns would be in US dollars, and hence there wouldn't be a concern, except the currency exchange risk you would have converting US dollars to a local currency. Now, if a sukuk were to issue a tranche of a series in another currency, now you'd have to look at the commercial aspect of whether it's actually in US dollars, and that would be paid or converted upon payment, or would it be actually in your local currency? And what is the provision for currency exchange risk taken or measures taken to cover that risk within the issuance documents?
Maybe Brother Tarmizi would like to ask a follow-up?
No, that's good enough. Thank you very much, Brother Han.
You're more than welcome.
I think we have a question in the box. Allow me to check. If I may read it. Hi, my name is Fariha. My question to Brother Hani, may we get your comment on the adoption by UAE on the certain Sharia compliance standard for sukuk, which has slowed the issuance of sukuk from the Gulf? Is this also going to affect the sukuk market of Malaysia in the future then? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fariha. That's a good question. I'd ask this question back to Fariha here, and I ask Fariha, do you have concrete evidence that sukuk issuances has dropped in terms of figure? Like, for example, say last year it was X billion dollars, now it's X minus Y or X plus Y. And if you do, because I was trying to look at such numbers generally for another purpose, but I couldn't come across any solid numbers. And if you do, kindly share, number one. Number two, I concur with what Mr. Anas Jaffal mentioned earlier. Compliance with standards is a concept of basically upskilling your practice. Now, you have a practice of Islamic finance, and to be very, very frank, there's always been criticism. People criticizing a specific product, the way a specific product is implemented, some of them criticizing entire industry, some considering it all to be haram and so forth. We still have scholars saying these things. And the idea of having a standard generally, I mean, whatever the industry, is something that is called for by all industries from a quality perspective. Now, for the Islamic finance industry, we do not have any standard except for AOFI. It's the only standing Sharia standard setting body. It's a non-profit organization that has a panel of internationally renowned Sharia scholars represented by most of the Islamic banks across the globe. And these Sharia scholars are the ones who know Islamic finance and investment inside out. And they opine as to what is compliant, what is not compliant. And to be honest, they do give us a lot of solutions. Some of them are things that are not even there in classical jurisprudence. So having said that, I will not negate the idea that it might also be limiting at some aspects. So if they come to a concept that, you know, is acceptable to Maliki school of thought and maybe Hanbali school of thought and acceptable in another two schools of thought, and they follow the opinion that prohibits, that is kind of limiting. But even when the High Sharia Authority of the UAE imposed this regulation, they say, look, if you do have a concern or an aspect where you want to do something that does not comply with AOFI, please justify and escalate, and they will look into it. So if you're following a different school of thought and that is something that is acceptable, they might just entertain depending on what the product is and how that works out. Now, but if you come to a prohibition where this is prohibited by all schools of thought, like you cannot lend on interest basis, don't even bother asking the High Sharia Authority for an exception. So again, generally speaking, yes, AOFI has a few hundred don'ts and a few hundred things that you cannot do, but there's also a lot of solutions there, and there are so many solutions beyond what is documented in AOFI. And hence, if it seems as a challenge, we need to take this on board as Sharia departments, ISSCs as well, and see how that pans out. My humble opinion is if an organization, whatever it is, doesn't have a standard, they need to make their own standards and live by it. Because if you don't have standards, well, you know, it's kind of open, and then it becomes open to controversy that you may not be able to fend for or protect your institutions from risk arising therefrom.
All right, thank you, Brother Hani. I think we have a brother raise his hand. Ali Muhammad, are you trying to unmute yourself? Brother Ali, would you like to speak with our speaker today?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I would like to ask, actually, I'm not a practitioner, but I'm a student, and I kind of understand that most of the sukuk nowadays is actually directed to non-Muslims in the West, and they kind of represent a huge chunk of sukuk buyers, but they often need fixity of returns like bonds, and also which is not actually in line with Sharia or acceptable in Islam. How do you go about these problems when you are selling sukuk in the West, and also sukuk holders receive payments mainly specifically derived from the assets, the underlying assets? Is that possible in your organization?
Okay, that's a very good question, Brother Ali. Inshallah, you'll be a practitioner of the future of finance. Now, if you think about sukuk, now there are two aspects to your question. One is it's being marketed to people in the West. Now, Islamic finance, I'm sure you know, is not restricted to Muslims. It's actually to everyone on planet Earth. Whatever they believe in, whatever their faith is, it's just something that is there for mankind. Having said that, yes, sukuk usually has a type where it's either a fixed rate instrument or a floating rate instrument based on a benchmark. And I do understand that even in sukuk documentation, there are parts of a prospectus that has to be very clear in language that the rate will be, let's say, 5% or IBOR plus 2% as an absolute obligation to be paid on the certificate based on its face amount. And if you read that on its own, and this is probably there in nearly every sukuk on planet Earth so far, you might think that this is Sharia repugnant, this is haram. Now, the way it stands, the way it's depicted, yes, but then you have to read the entire documentation in its entirety and see how different provisions work together, and this is where it kind of gets complicated. But then again, you'll find that within the same documentations that they say that no payments whatsoever, whether the solution amount at maturity or a periodic distribution amount on a quarterly basis or a periodic basis, none of those payments will be made by the trustee to the certificate holders unless there are certain funds derived from the underlying transaction documents and sukuk assets that can provide for such payments to be made. So it's like saying, hey, I'll give you 5% a year, but then bear in mind, I will only give you that 5% if I do get the 5% rental income from the Ijara Muntaib Tamlik underlying asset. Because no matter what the Sharia compliant transaction is, there's still a possibility that the relevant obligor defaults. He cannot pay, something goes wrong. And if payment is not being made, then the trustee has no resource to pay those amounts, and then there's a default on the issuance itself. And that is a possible situation. It can happen. No one can say that's impossible. But the risk is something like 1 in a million. It's something that is highly mitigated to the point that you can rest assured that 99% of the time you will get those returns. Because at the end of the day, as an investor yourself, if you have $100,000 to invest, every one of you, and I come to you and propose an investment opportunity. I say, brothers, inshallah, we will invest in this amazing project. And this is in real estate. And, you know, I've been doing this for the last 50 years, you know, me and my parents before me and my grandparents before us. And we've been in this business for so long, and I'm the right person you'd want to invest with. But, you know, in 2021, all the way up to 2025, we expect a return of -2%. You'll only lose 2% of your capital. Would you be interested to invest with me? I don't know, but if I were you, I will not invest with me. So having said that, you would want to see an investee who would say, you know, I make 10% a year. And if you invest with us, this is how much your money will attract. And we can do a 50-50 split and so forth. Or I have this opportunity where I can actually, you know, acquire this asset and lease it on ijara mutabit tamlik to this specific obligor, whether an airline company or whatever. And that will yield 6% return, which you can keep 5%, and whatever is over and above the 5% is mine to keep as investment agent. And then you say, yeah, this sounds good. I probably want to invest with you. Now, does this mean it's now a fixed rate investment? No, it is not. It's something that has an expectation to achieve 6% return where you get to keep 5% and forego 1% for me. However, it doesn't make it Sharia repugnant the way it is structured as such. I hope I've answered your question.
Very clear. Thank you very much, Brother Hani. And I think that would be it for today. We have exceeded way over time, but way out of interest, and it is all out of passion, inshallah. Thank you again for Mr. Anas and Ms. Asma for your input. Give me a second, yeah, while I bring up the screen. Okay, again, thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we have completed the virtual industry visit. It's a literally a virtual visit into UAE's Islamic banking and finance industry. Thank you again for our stakeholders today, Dubai Islamic Bank and Emirates NDB Islamic window. This marks the conclusion of our program. Since we have addressed the question and answers, I believe that is it for us today. If you have further questions and answers, you can mail them to us, and then we try to converge that and try having it answered after the program maybe. So in the end of the day, we have arrived at the end of our event. Thank you everyone for making this event such a success. Yes, again, I'd like to remind that the session is recorded and it would be made available following up with the university, inshallah. Again, on behalf of the university, I'd like to thank our speakers, Brother Hani, Brother Anas, Ms. Asma, and the brothers before from the first session. Again, thank you. Thank you for making this such a great success. With that, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair. And we end session today with Tasbih Tara, Surah Al-As.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.